I never thought I would be the kind of man who cried in a pharmacy parking lot. I spent 38 years as an electrician, raised 2 children mostly on my own after my wife got sick, and buried her 3 years ago last November. I know what hard looks like. I know what loss feels like. But nothing in my life had prepared me for the moment a stranger behind a pharmacy counter looked at me with something close to horror and said, "Sir, please tell me you haven't been taking these." That was the moment everything changed. Let me take you back to the beginning, because the beginning matters. It always does. My wife passed in the fall, the kind of fall where the leaves are so beautiful it almost feels cruel. She had fought for 2 years, and she fought hard. And when she finally let go, I held her hand and told her I would be all right. I believed it when I said it. I had the house, a paid-off mortgage, a decent pension from 38 years of union work, and 2 grown children who I thought loved me. I had the oak tree in the backyard she had planted the year our daughter was born. I had 34 years of photographs and albums on the shelf she had organized by decade. I had enough. My daughter lives out in Seattle with her husband and their 2 girls. She calls me every Sunday without fail, and on my birthday she flies back to Ohio no matter what. She is the kind of person who remembers things, not just birthdays, but the details inside them. She remembered that I used to put exactly 1 sugar in my coffee until her mother convinced me to try it black, and I never went back. She remembered the name of my first dog. She is that kind of person. My son lives 40 minutes away in Columbus. He visits more often, which I always took as a sign of closeness. I was proud of him for staying near home. After his mother passed, he started coming by every 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes more. He would bring groceries, help with things around the house, sit with me on the back porch. I told my daughter on our Sunday calls that I was lucky to have him so close. I believed that too. About 8 months after my wife died, my son brought me a gift. He set it on the kitchen table with the kind of energy that reminded me of when he was a boy presenting a drawing, that mix of pride and wanting approval that parents recognize immediately. It was a large glass jar with a dark green label. "Premium Heart Health Supplements," the label said. Omega-3, CoQ10, magnesium, a handful of other things I couldn't pronounce. He had done research, he told me. He'd read that men my age, particularly those who had experienced significant stress and grief, needed extra cardiovascular support. He had ordered the best ones he could find. He would bring a new jar every month, so I never ran out. I was touched. I told him it was thoughtful. He watched me open the jar, watched me read the label, watched me put one in my palm and swallow it with a glass of water. He nodded like something had been confirmed for him, and then he changed the subject and we talked about football for the rest of the afternoon. I started taking one every morning with breakfast, the way the label said. By winter, I was tired in a way I had never been tired before. Not the tired of a long day on a job site, not even the tired of grief, which has its own particular weight. This was something different, a fog that sat behind my eyes, a heaviness in my chest that came and went without pattern. I would stand up from the couch and need a moment before I could walk. I started missing steps, going up the stairs, not falling, just misjudging where my foot was supposed to land, like my depth perception was slightly off. I went to my doctor in January. He ran blood work, checked my heart, told me I was 66 years old and had recently lost my wife and was probably not sleeping enough or eating right and should try to get outside more. He was not dismissive exactly, but he sent me home without answers. I went back in March with the same complaints. He adjusted my blood pressure medication and suggested I see a grief counselor. My daughter noticed on our Sunday calls. She would ask how I was feeling and I would say fine, and she would be quiet for a moment in the way that meant she did not believe me. In April, she told me she was coming to visit, not for a holiday, just to visit. She spent 4 days with me, and on the 3rd day she sat down across from me at the kitchen table with an expression I had not seen on her face since her mother's diagnosis. She asked me to walk her through a typical day. What I ate, what I took, when I slept, when the symptoms were worst. I told her everything, including the supplements my son had been bringing. She picked up the current jar from the counter and turned it over in her hands for a long time without saying anything. She asked if she could take the jar home with her. I told her she was being dramatic. She smiled and said probably. But could she take it anyway? I let her, mostly to reassure her. My son brought a fresh jar 2 weeks later, and I started on that one. I want to be honest about something, because I think it matters. During those months, I did not suspect my son. I want to be very clear about that. The thought did not enter my mind. When you have watched someone grow from an infant into an adult, when you have taught them to ride a bicycle and sat in the hospital when they broke their arm and driven 3 hours to move them into their first apartment, the idea that they could mean you harm does not fit anywhere in your mind. There is no slot for it. You would sooner suspect yourself. My daughter called me on a Tuesday in May. Not our usual Sunday call. She called on a Tuesday afternoon, and her voice was the kind of careful that told me she had been rehearsing. She told me she had taken the supplements to a lab. She had a friend from college who worked in pharmaceutical testing, and she had asked her friend to look at the contents without telling her where they came from or why. Her friend had called her back within a week. The capsules contained approximately 30% of the listed supplement ingredients. The rest was a mixture that included, in measurable quantities, a compound used in certain rodenticides. Rat poison, in the plain language of it, though my daughter did not use those words immediately. She built up to them slowly, and I could tell she was watching for how I would receive them. I sat in the kitchen where I had eaten breakfast every morning for 22 years, and I did not say anything for what felt like a very long time. I want to tell you that I was furious. The fury did come, but not first. What came first was something closer to vertigo. Not physical. I was sitting down, but a tilting of everything I understood to be true. 30 years of memories doing a slow turn. Every visit and phone call and holiday dinner suddenly seen from a different angle. I thought about my son watching me take that first capsule. I thought about his nod, the confirmation in his face. My daughter was still talking. She told me she had not gone to the police yet. She wanted to talk to me first. She said she needed me to do something important before anyone made any moves, and she needed me to trust her completely. I told her she had my trust. She has always had my trust. She told me she was already booked on a flight back to Ohio. She would be there Thursday. In the meantime, I was to stop taking the supplements she had expected. I would still have the new jar, but I was not to throw them away, or move them, or change anything else in the house. I was to act normally if my son called or visited. I was not to confront him. I told her I understood, and then, because I needed to say it out loud to someone, I told her that I could not understand why, that I needed there to be a reason, even a terrible one. She was quiet for a moment. Then she told me she had been doing some additional research, looking into things she probably should have looked into sooner. She said there was something I should know about our house. Our house, the one my wife and I had bought in 1989, the one we had paid off over 20 years, the one where both children had grown up, it sits on a corner lot in a neighborhood that has changed considerably since we moved in. New development coming in from the west. A commercial corridor expanding 2 streets over. The assessed value when my wife died was a little over $300,000. A developer had been quietly acquiring properties on our block for the past 18 months. My daughter had found the records. The offers being made were running between $400,000 and $450,000 for comparable lots. My wife's will left everything to me. My will, which I had written years ago and not revisited, left everything split equally between both children. Half of $450,000 is $225,000. My son had credit card debt I did not know about. A second mortgage on his house I did not know about. A business venture from 3 years ago that had failed and left obligations I did not know about. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after I hung up the phone. He had never asked me for money. I want to say that clearly, because it is the part that has taken me the longest to sit with. He had never come to me and said he was in trouble. He had never given me the chance to help him the way a father helps a son. Instead, he had come to my house every month with a jar of capsules and watched me swallow what he had put inside them. And he had waited. My daughter arrived Thursday evening. She had not checked a bag. She had come straight from the airport, and she stood in my kitchen with her coat still on and looked at me the way she had been looking at me since she was small, like she was taking inventory of every part of me to make sure nothing was missing. I told her I was all right. She did not quite believe me, and I did not quite mean it, but we left it there. She had spoken with an attorney friend before flying out. She laid it out for me at the kitchen table, the way she has always organized complicated things, clearly and in the right order. The most important thing, the attorney had said, was documentation before confrontation. My daughter had already sent the lab results and the chain of custody for the supplements to the attorney's office. The next step was to get my son on record. I told her I did not know if I could do it. Talk to him like everything was normal, knowing what I knew. She put her hand over mine on the table and told me I had been doing a hard thing for months without even knowing it. I could do one more hard thing, on purpose. She set her phone on the counter the next morning, screen down, recording application running, before she called my son and told him casually that she was in town visiting and that we should all have dinner together. He said he would come Saturday afternoon. She left the phone running in the kitchen for both conversations that followed, and she positioned herself where she could hear everything but give us the space that she knew my son would not speak freely without. I am going to tell you what happened on Saturday, and I am going to tell it straight, because it deserves to be told straight. My son arrived at 2 in the afternoon. He brought a bakery box, something he had done since he was a teenager, a habit from his mother that had stuck. He hugged me at the door and I held on a second longer than usual because I could not help it, and then I stepped back and looked at him, and he looked back at me, and for one moment I thought about all the years between his birth and that afternoon. I thought about every version of him I had known. We sat in the living room for a while, the three of us, talking about nothing in particular. My daughter is good at that, at conversation that moves on the surface while she watches what is underneath. She asked him how work was going, how the house was holding up, whether he had been in touch with any of the cousins. He answered easily, comfortably. He did not seem nervous. After a while, my daughter excused herself to make coffee, and my son and I were alone. I had been thinking about what I was going to say for 3 days. I had written it out, revised it, thrown it away, started over. In the end, I did not use any of it. I just looked at him and said, quietly, that I knew about the supplements. He went still, in a way that was different from being calm. A stopped kind of still. I told him I knew what was in them. I told him my daughter had had them tested. I told him I knew about the debt and the developer and the property value, and that I understood the math he had been doing. I told him I was not shouting because I did not have it in me to shout, and also because I needed to hear what he was going to say. What he said first was that he could explain. Then, before he explained anything, he said he had not meant for it to go as far as it had. Then he said he had been planning to stop. He said this last part, looking at the floor. I asked him what stopping looked like in his plan, whether it had a date attached to it or just a feeling. He did not answer that. I asked him if he had thought about what it would feel like for me, whether he had thought about it at all, or whether he had found a way to keep himself from thinking about it. He said he had told himself I would never know. He said this quietly, without looking up, and I think he understood as he said it what it revealed. Not a defense, not even a real answer, just the architecture of how he had managed to do what he had done. As long as I never found out, he did not have to know what he was doing to me. My daughter came back into the room. She had the phone in her hand and she was not hiding it. She set it on the coffee table and she told my son, in a voice that was steady and completely without warmth, that everything he had just said had been recorded, and that she had already spoken to an attorney, and that a report would be filed with the police before he left the property that evening. She told him he could go to the police himself first if he chose to, and that she would not stop him. She told him that she was doing this not in anger, but because there was no other right thing to do. He looked at me then, not at her, at me. He was looking for something, and I understood what it was. He was looking for the version of me that would step in, that would find a way to fix it, the way I had always fixed things for him. The father who would weigh his future against everything else and find a reason to let it go. I told him I loved him. I told him that had not changed and would not change. And then I told him that his sister was right, and that I would not be standing in the way of what came next. What came next took several months. I want to give you the full account, because I know from my own experience of stories like this that endings matter, and vague endings feel like loose wires, unsatisfying and slightly dangerous. My son did not go to the police himself. My daughter filed the report that evening, as she had said she would, and I was seen by a doctor the following week who specialized in toxicology and confirmed chronic low-level exposure consistent with the compound found in the capsules. The symptoms I had been experiencing, the fatigue, the cognitive fog, the cardiac irregularities, were consistent with the exposure timeline. With the supplements stopped, my body had already begun recovering on its own in the weeks since my daughter had first taken the jar. My son was arrested 6 weeks after that Saturday afternoon. He was charged with felony poisoning and attempted aggravated assault. His attorney negotiated. The prosecution had the lab results, the recording, the medical documentation, and the property records establishing motive. There was not a great deal of room to negotiate. He was sentenced to 14 years. The judge, in giving the sentence, noted the premeditation involved the months of deliberate, repeated action, and the particular nature of the betrayal, a son poisoning a grieving father in his own home, in the home where he had been raised. The judge said some things at sentencing that I will not repeat here because they were said to my son and were meant for him. But I will tell you that I was present in the courtroom and that I did not look away. I have been asked, more than once in the months since, whether I have forgiven him. It is a harder question than it sounds, and I have tried to answer it honestly. What I can tell you is that I do not carry hatred. I have tried that weight, and it is too heavy for a man my age to carry without it affecting his stride. And I have had enough things affect my stride this past year. I think of him. I think of the boy he was, and the man I thought he was, and the man he turned out to be, and I try to understand how those are all the same person without making the mistake of letting that understanding become an excuse. What I have settled on is something like this. Forgiving someone does not require pretending that what they did was something other than what it was. It does not require silence. It does not require absorbing the consequences of their choices into your own body and calling that love. My wife used to say that real love had a spine. I did not fully understand what she meant when she said it. I think I understand it better now. My daughter came back to Ohio for a long weekend in the fall. We sat on the back porch in the evening the way I used to sit with her mother. And the oak tree had gone orange and gold the way it does every year. And she brought 2 cups of coffee, black, no sugar, the way I have taken it for 30 years. And we sat there, without needing to fill the silence with anything. She told me she was sorry she had not noticed sooner. I told her she had noticed in time, which is the only thing that matters about noticing. She told me she worried about me being alone in the house. I told her that I was not lonely in the house, that the house was full of 34 years of good memories and I intended to stay in it until they carried me out, and that I would not be giving any developer a single square foot of the corner lot where my wife's oak tree still stood. She laughed at that, the real laugh, the one that sounds like her mother's. There is one more thing I want to say, and then I am done. In the week after everything came to light, before the arrest and the lawyers and the long mechanical process of consequence, I had a few days that were quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a storm, where you walk outside and assess what is standing and what is not. I went through those days slowly, letting things land. What landed hardest was not the betrayal itself, though that was heavy enough. What landed hardest was the realization that I had been so certain of something that was not true. I had built my understanding of my son on 30+ years of evidence, and I had been so confident in that understanding that I had stopped questioning it. I had stopped looking closely at the jar on my kitchen counter because it came from his hands. Certainty can be a kind of blindness. I know that now in a way I did not know before. Not a cynical lesson. I do not mean that you should suspect everyone or trust no one. I mean something more specific, that love without attention is not enough. That caring for the people in your life means continuing to look at them clearly, even when what you see is uncomfortable, even when looking costs you something. My wife knew that. She always looked at the people she loved clearly. I used to think it was a kind of toughness. Now I think it was a kind of devotion. I am 67 years old. I wake up most mornings without the fog now, without the heaviness in my chest. I make my coffee and I sit by the window, and sometimes I look at the oak tree, and I think about everything I still have, which is considerable. I think about my daughter and her girls, who call me on Sunday now too, little voices in the background of their mother's calls. I think about 38 years of work that meant something, and a house that belongs to me, and a life that is still mine to finish on my own terms. Whatever comes next, I intend to pay attention.